good people don't smoke marijuana.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana. Radio show. The medical marijuana for you and me. Ah, yeah, the medical marijuana. Whoa, 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 ah, yeah, the medical. It's the medical marijuana show. You will know.
I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. Hey, boy, don't feel my world untrue. Yeah, I want to talk to you. My world can be true if you do what I tell you to. I want to talk to you.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Medical Marijuana Radio. This one is for Saturday, October 21st, 2017. I'm your host, Larry Love. We're here every week to bring you the latest information on medical cannabis and the use of adult cannabis from all over the globe. This week, a long conversation with Rick Cusick, formerly of High Times Magazine, going to give us a little bit of history about that and who some of the pioneers were. He's also COO of Whoopi and Maya, making those products for medical patients in California, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And it was a really interesting conversation covering some of the history of cannabis. We could probably talk many more hours on it as well, but it'll just give you some interesting information, and it was a really nice conversation. But first up, as always, I've got some news for you, and the interesting one this week is that Jeff Sessions is calling for more competition among medical marijuana growers for research, and this I haven't even heard very many people talk about this. It just came from out of the blue, so let me play that for you here.
First, I'd like to discuss a substance which is often offered as a substitute for opioids.
This is Orrin Hatch.
Many states across the nation have adopted laws to legalize marijuana for medicinal use based on research suggesting there is some medicinal benefit or value to be found in it. To be clear, I remain opposed to the broad legalization of marijuana. However, I introduced, along with Senator Schatz, the Bipartisan Marijuana Effective Drug Studies Act of 2017, or the MEDS Act, because I believe that scientists need to study the potential benefits and dangers of marijuana. And I'm very concerned about recent reports that DOJ and DEA are at odds on marijuana research, particularly when it comes to granting applications to grow marijuana for further research. Can you clarify the position of the Justice Department regarding these applications?
I'd be pleased, Senator Hatch, and thank you for your leadership, and I've been honored to serve under your chairmanship. We have a marijuana research system working now, but there's one supplier of the marijuana for that research. People have asked that there be multiple sources of the marijuana for medicinal research, and have asked that it be approved. I believe there are now 26 applications for approval of suppliers who would provide marijuana for medicinal research. Each one of those has to be supervised by the DEA, and I have raised questions about how many, and let's be sure we're doing this in the right way, because it costs a lot of money to supervise these events. So I think it'd be healthy to have some more competition in the supply, but I'm sure we don't need 26 new suppliers.
So this is really very interesting. One of the problems has been, of course, that the research that has been done by the government here locally over the last bunch of years has been really to prove the negativity of the effects of cannabis, and of course they couldn't find any really. Then as the quality of the cannabis that they use and give to Irv Rosenfeld and some other people is just really crappy. So, and one of the studies had to be canceled because of the researchers thought that the approved cannabis was just crappy and not even worth doing. So this is a good thing, and let's see where this goes. Now, at the same time that Jeff Sessions seems to be coming around, is he or not? I don't know. A tribe in Las Vegas, Nevada, has opened up the largest marijuana store on the planet. Here's this report.
The Paiute tribe says it just opened the largest cannabis dispensary on the planet in downtown Las Vegas.
Right, and the tribe doesn't exactly have to follow all the same rules. Fox 5's Adam Herbets is live at the new cannabis marketplace off of Main and Washington to explain. Adam?
Well, Miguel, Christine, they don't necessarily have to follow all the same rules, but they say they're going to because they understand this operation is going to be under a microscope. Now, a lot of people didn't even realize the Paiute tribe had land in this area. We're very close to downtown. We're in downtown, just off of Fremont Street, but the area is small. There's nothing small about this dispensary. The Paiute tribe just opened up shop.
Nu'u actually means the people.
And just changed its drug testing policy.
I actually bought the first product out of our store. I bought some Willie's Reserve and Skywalker OG.
First time here. Love it.
They're calling it the largest dispensary on the planet.
I think we're pretty close to it.
Well, I don't know about that. I've seen well, actually, yeah, I would say it probably the biggest one I've been to.
I just want to be in the business just like everybody else. You know, we want to be fair.
The tribe regulates itself, but says its restrictions will be just as tough, if not tougher, than the rest of the state.
They have everything I'm looking for, everything I'm not looking for, and everything else in between.
Customer Davi Digitelli is so excited, he's going straight to bed.
I have really bad sleep problems, and the first time I took an edible, I slept 9 hours straight, and it's kind of been my thing ever since.
I hope it leads the way. It's a great revenue stream, and I hope the money's used wisely.
The tribe says that money will be used wisely. Everyone who buys a product from this location will still be taxed the same amount as they would be if they bought marijuana at a different location off of an Indian reservation. But instead of that money going to the state, those taxes will go to the tribe itself. They said they're going to use that money for things like medical services and education. Right now, this place closes at 2 a.m. Yesterday was the soft opening. At one point, though, they want to change it so that this place is open 24 hours, and they want to open a drive-through. We'll tell you the updates as they come in, but for now, we're live downtown. Adam Herbets, Miguel, Christine, will throw it back to you.
Wow, that just sounds incredible. I do get to Las Vegas a couple times a year, and I can't wait to check out that store. If you're a regular listener to this show, you know that about 5 years ago, I predicted that Las Vegas was going to be the cannabis capital of the world. Everybody's going to be going there and legally being able to use this plant. Now, in Florida, where they have a really weird medical program, they're having some problems. Here's a report. In Florida, no card, no medicine for thousands of patients, and so they're having a problem getting their cards.
Thousands of patients in Florida getting the thumbs up for medical marijuana treatments. However, they can't start receiving medication. That's because they haven't received an ID card from the state. As Mike Vasalinda tells us, those cards have been delayed because of short staffing.
More than 42,000 people have been recommended to use medical marijuana. The way the system works is that once their name's been added to a registry, they must apply for an ID card, and that's where there's a bottleneck.
Well, you have to have a card. So you have to go see a doctor, they have to approve it, and then you have to submit your application, get the card, and then you can go to the dispensary. That time frame could be anywhere from 30 to 60 days, now we're hearing. If you're sick, it's a long wait. If you've got cancer or if you've got serious disease, waiting 60, 90, 120 days is a long time.
You think that will force people into the black market?
It may if they're not there already.
The state is in the process of contracting with a private vendor to issue ID cards. The problem for patients, though, is that delays could get longer before they get shorter as the transition takes place. Reporting from the state capitol, I'm Mike Vasalinda.
It's unknown how many of the 42,000 people on the register have received their cards and how many are still waiting. The Department of Health did not return our call or email seeking more information.
Heard that story before. Growing pains, and they should be learning from other states that have been going through this for 9 and 10 years and even more. It's a shame that it takes so much time. One more story before we take a little break, and then we get to our interview with, a conversation with Rick Cusick. In Michigan, if you want to be in the medical cannabis industry business, you need to have assets up to about $500,000.
They were talking about putting prices like $300,000 for a distribution center or $200,000 minimum requirement to drive a car with product around the state.
Shock and outrage over the prices to break into the medical marijuana industry in Michigan. Those looking to open up pot shops or keep their dispensaries open might be in for some serious sticker shock. News 10's Mallory Anderson is here now with details from Tuesday's meeting of the State Medical Marijuana Licensing Board. Mallory.
Laura, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, even up to $1 million, for anyone wanting to break into the marijuana industry here in Michigan. And that is a whole lot of green. Uproar at a meeting Tuesday where the board discussed just how much it would cost. Here are some of the fees: $300,000 just to open a dispensary, $150,000 to grow up to 500 marijuana plants, and it would cost even more to grow up to 1,000 plants. Other fees include $200,000 for a testing facility and $200,000 to transport. This all on top of the thousands in license and regulatory fees from the state and government. During the public comment period at the meeting, people lashed out, saying all the fees will cut jobs in Michigan and put mom and pop shops out of business. Some argue it costs just $50,000 to open a liquor store and are questioning why it would be so much more to sell medical marijuana.
$0 to be in the pharmacy business. You have to have $25,000 to be in tobacco business, $50,000 to be in liquor, and they want to say over $1 million for medical marijuana. That excludes the majority of people who are trying to work in this industry, and that is just exactly not what we need in Michigan.
I think is going to unnecessarily exclude a lot of people that want to be entrepreneurs from participating in what we all know is going to be a jobs boom for the state of Michigan.
One board member did agree with many who commented. David LaMontagne says the cost would prevent minority business owners and mom and pop operations from coming up with the cash to open a dispensary. However, another board member, retired State Police Trooper Don Bailey, who wanted to shut down all dispensaries until December, argued there is plenty of money in marijuana to justify the steep costs. Laura.
That's called greed. And, of course, it gets passed down to the consumer, whether it's medical or recreational. And it also gets passed down to what an employee can make, because they're making it so hard, for people to get into this business. So that's really sad. But let's learn by some of these mistakes, people. We'll be right back with my conversation with Rick Cusick right after this.
It's all about the 420 MMJRadio. The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana radio. Radio show.
Okay, we're back. And last night I had the opportunity to speak with Rick Cusick. And, this is how it went. And I'll let him introduce himself.
I'm at Whoopi and Maya right now. I'm one of the co-founders of it with Whoopi. I knew her from High Times. I was the associate publisher of High Times and the co-editor before that. The thing I keep telling everybody is I thought I knew everything from being the associate publisher of High Times I was involved with High Times for 18 years. And then I did a year and a half in medical cannabis in California, setting up Whoopi and Maya. And boy, I felt like I went back to kindergarten again. It was great.
Well,
and I reinvented myself in that regard. And now that business is up and running and thriving. And I've decided at 63 to take a step back and do what I always wanted to do, largely because the situation presented itself. And that is I'm writing a book about Donald Trump and the art of lying.
The Art of Lying. That's
The Art of the Lie is the name of the book, and it'll be out sometime by the end of the year. And that's what I'm doing currently. But pretty much, and on top of that, I'm a board member of NORML. I'm the chairman of New Jersey NORML. I'm a big fan of NORML. And that's pretty much what I'm working with right now. So the last 6 or 7 months of my life, I've been out of cannabis, trying to get this book done. But right after that, I'm going to be doing another book based on cannabis. 2 more books after that based on cannabis.
Wow, that sounds like you're really accelerating since your retirement. So that's great, Rick.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how I can. I've been going into New York every day for 18 years, and I'm trying to figure out how I can do what I want to do and not have to leave my couch.
That's exactly what our generation should be doing right now.
That's right.
So let's just
the
go.
only thing I care about. That's it. I mean, that's it.
So
my
listen,
daughter, everybody knows me as my daughter's kind of been with me throughout this entire journey, and she's very well known in the cannabis community. And I was I MC for a long time at Seattle Hempfest and an MC, a stage presence at Boston, and she was with me every step of the way.
Wow.
And
what's her name?
Lily now. She's 20 years old, and so, like I said, she's grown, and a wonderful, wonderful young woman. And so her and High Times actually happened at exactly the same time in my life.
Ah, there you go.
And, I'm going to be writing a book called Reefer Dadness, which is about raising my daughter while I was one of the executives at High Times.
Well, you certainly must have a lot of stories to tell, and I just want to say, let's just go right into our interview. I think you just gave one of the greatest introductions that I've ever heard. So let's just say we're now talking with Rick Cusick, who just introduced himself. And like I said to Rick earlier, I was there for issue 1, number 1 of High Times. But let's talk about now. Okay, you were.
Yeah, but before you leave that subject, I was there for issue number 1 of volume 1 of High Times. But I was 19 years old.
Oh, my.
My friend Mike Young popped into the room. You ever see the 70s show? You know how they get high in the basement?
Sure.
I was getting high in my friend Mike Young's mother's basement. Just like that. And I'm the exact same age as that kid in the 70s show. And if you look at me now, that's what he looks like now. Wow. And I was getting there, and all of a sudden Mark Pack popped into the room and pulled up this magazine. Look what I got. I said, what's that? He goes, it's a magazine about marijuana. And I said, get the fuck out of here. And sure enough, that was my destiny walking in the doorway.
So, again, the pictures is what turned everybody on back then. And we were just amazed. We didn't know really what that was. Being in Los Angeles at that time, I had seen Mexican, and it was still a little bit too early for any Sensimilla, and it's still a little bit too early for
very early, yep.
Colombian and all that stuff. But it just was enlightening a generation and now generations.
And everything was imported. Nothing was grown in the United States.
Mm-hmm. So, like pictures of Sensimilla back in the 70s would have come from Europe somewhere.
Yeah, well, pretty much. I mean, the guy who started High Times was Thomas King Forsad. He was a pot smuggler and one of the biggest marijuana dealers in New York City. And so he had access to his own stash, his own work, which came out of the Caribbean and came out of South America and places like that. And he actually flew the planes back and forth and did the whole thing. And so a lot of what we had back, I wasn't there at the time, but a lot of what High Times had at the time came from Tom's connections. And actually, on the second issue of High Times, you can see this big smuggler plane that's on the cover, and that was actually the plane he used in order to smuggle weed in.
Wow. What, you know what? Obviously, I'm not sure. Has there been a documentary of High Times from the beginning?
No, there's been a number of different, history vignettes running around here and there. I believe they're working on a book about Tom now, and that'll include the founding of High Times. Tom was a pretty wild character, and the High Times was his most famous child, crazy child. But he's had a number of them. And a very, very dynamic individual. He died young, and helped start this movement. He's actually, by my lights, if you talk about the 5 most influential people in marijuana law reform throughout the history of the current, post-war marijuana law reform, Tom Persaud's definitely in the top 5.
And who would some of the others be, in no particular order?
Yeah, it's funny. You asked a question. I brought it up, but it comes from a stupid place. A couple of years ago, we did a kind of a cover on High Times, kind of silly, about the Mount Cushmore of marijuana. And it was all these rappers that they put on Mount Cushmore and stuff, So me and the guys at the magazine were at lunch, and we were talking who would be the real guys, And the thing is it's all men at the beginning, because the whole thing started 50 years ago. And the first impressions were made by people in that era. And I think the first 5 are kind of inarguable because they've really influenced everything else. There's maybe 1 or 2 people I would add, but easily Dr. Lester Grinspoon from Harvard University, who wrote Marijuana Reconsidered in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
Easily Keith Strop, who founded NORML. Most everybody who got into marijuana law reform or some kind of reform organization passed through or started with NORML. Tom Persaud, who started High Times, he wasn't around for the 40 years that it was on the stands every month and never missed a publication date.
Wow!
So every month for 40 years, we banged that out. I was there for 18 years. I was privileged to be there for 18, and they banged that out for 40 years without missing a publication date. Almost went out of business a couple of times. And that magazine, in its consistency, was a consistent advertisement to America that they must legalize marijuana. And also, we were saying that it always comes from another country when we were young. Domestic marijuana was really promoted heavily by High Times in the back of the classified ads, how to grow your own pot, the lights, the halide lights, things like that.
So
that was a huge contribution.
Who was the first person to write an article on growing indoors?
Well, that would be Ed. I mean, Ed Rosenthal.
Rosenthal?
Yeah, absolutely. He was at the beginning. Maybe second. He would say he was right there when Tom got the idea, but I don't think that's true. On the other hand, I would say that it's he was there at the very early, perhaps the second issue, and they ran him as a column, and he was central to the entire thing. And then there was a lot of other people who ran grow articles as well. The very first, interestingly enough, though, that's High Times we're talking about. Interestingly enough, the very first cultivation book was done by Mountain Girl, who was, Jerry Garcia's wife, and had a child with Ken Kesey. And she did a book on cannabis cultivation, like in '69 or something like that.
That's some history.
Yeah, that is really some history. I'm a history buff, and for the 18 years I had in High Times, I was kind of in charge of the cultural history for the magazine.
Well, you certainly need to, digitize and document all this stuff. It's just we need to know that. I was just a few minutes ago listening to another show, a couple of breeders, Subcool and Mr. Soul from Brothers Grimm are on right now as we're speaking on live on YouTube doing a thing, and it was just so interesting to see these guys that have a lot of history on where the strains came from and so forth. So documenting this stuff.
Real deal, man. And he just got in some trouble with that fire in California. So that's another thing too. But Subcool is the real deal. Yeah, I was talking about the 5. I want to finish about the 2 things because Tom certainly and Lester and Keith Strop. Jack Hara, of course, is the soul of our movement, and I would put Jack in there as well. And interestingly enough, and that's why I want to finish this, the fifth person never really gets that as much credit. Have you ever heard of Bob Randall?
No, I don't believe I have.
Yeah, a lot of people have not. Bob Randall, separate of everyone, was a glaucoma patient in the early 70s.
Oh, he's one of the Irving Rosenfeld people.
He was the guy way before Irving who actually went in and said, I have glaucoma. There's no reason you should deny me this.
Yes.
It really helps me. And he took it all the way. And he was the guy for whom they created the investigative new drug program, of which Irving is a member, or was a member. Yeah, he's a grandfathered in.
Yeah, how amazing that that whole program has been around for 45 years or so, and at the same time they're denying any medical value.
Well, they started giving it out in the 90s, and then a lot of the AIDS community started asking for medical marijuana in bulk, and that's when they stopped doing. And the guys like Irving and Elvie, they were grandfathered into the program and still are, but they stopped the program back in 91, 92.
You know, I've heard how terrible that medicine is that they give those people.
Yeah, I mean again, but you know, I think Irving. I don't think Irving's ever smoked anything except what they give him as a point of pride, if nothing else, as well. He's a piece of work. I like Irving a lot. You don't expect them to have all the quality. A lot of this has happened here. The quality we speak of marijuana has happened because of the cultural changes, which include prohibition, as factors. And I believe somebody said it, and I'm not going to disagree with it, that the plant has changed more in the last 50 years than it has in the last 5,000.
And probably in the last 20, even faster. It's just been quite amazing. Did you ever think that it would take, when you were back, at High Times in the 70s, that it would take, 40-something years to get where we are today?
No, well, first I didn't come to High Times until 97.
Okay,
but,
97.
But like I say, I started smoking pot around 1970. Keith Strop and I are good friends, and he used to tell me that he and Lester Grinspoon, when they started this whole thing, they would say it's going to take 2-3 years. And one time Lester was talking to Carl Sagan, and Carl Sagan asked him, how long do you think it's going to take, Lester? And he said, about maybe 5 years. And he says, oh, you're crazy. That's going to be 2 years. He was talking in 1973. And so Lester now is, he's over, I guess, 88 years old, something like that. And for him to see the world finally come around, to see from something that he started with a few people so many years ago. And, if I was going to that 5 people, there's a sixth person who really belongs on the list, but it doesn't fit neatly into my 5 list. And that is Allen Ginsberg. And Allen Ginsberg really was the first activist.
The great poet of Berkeley in the 60s.
Yeah, in 1959, 1960, after he had gotten some acclaim and into some trouble with Howell and Kaddish, he was on a television show in 1959, 60, the John Crosby Show. And he was with Norman Mailer. He was with Ashley Montague, who's a scholar from Princeton. And the question was the Beat generation. They were talking about the Beats. And right in the middle of it, Alan did a left turn and said, I'd like to change the subject for a moment and talk about marijuana. And he basically took a little bit of his celebrity credibility, the currency he had as a celebrity, and he spent it right there. And that was the first time we had somebody just say, hey, there's nothing wrong with marijuana. And they made Mailer agree that he had tried it and he didn't think it was a big deal. And Ashley Montague chimed in on the cultural and sociological aspects of cannabis. And it was a television show out of time. It was 59, 60.
Was he hurt by it in any way?
No, it was on a local TV show in New York City. It's part of his story, but it's really not even part of the cannabis story that much. And it goes further. In 1960, there was another guy in '64 in San Francisco who smoked a joint, or Egelmeyer, I believe his name was, and he walked into a police station in San Francisco, lit a joint, blew it out, and said, "Arrest me." And they were doing his lawyer started an organization, Lamar, for the legalizing of marijuana in order to help him with his defense. And Allen Ginsberg was in California, saw that, and came back and did the East Coast version of Lamar, and that's how the national movement got born.
Wow, it took a lot of people. I mean, you can go back even further for people that were just well known celebrities in the cannabis industry. I'm a big fan of Mesro and Louis Armstrong, Satchmo, and the story is, my father was a jazz musician, so he told me about Mesro in the 60s. He told me about Mesro, and the story was that Louis Armstrong would have his band touring around the country, and he would send a telegram back in like the 30s or 40s to Mez and say, I'm in South Carolina, I need some arrangements. Can you send me some arrangements for the band? And of course, a shoebox full of cannabis was the arrangement.
I tell you, I'm doing some books right now, and I got 3 books, and the third book is called Louis Armstrong on Weed.
Oh, fabulous.
It's the story of Louis Armstrong. You can actually, he smoked so much weed for so long a time and kept so many records about it that you can literally do his biography from a green bale,
Yeah,
so that's what I'm doing.
He also was a recording buff and recorded everything. There's so much hours and hours and hours of him talking.
Everything.
And
it's all here. No, people can't go through it because there's so much of it. It's over in Queens. I live in New Jersey. It's over in Queens, and you can go in there, and just everything. He used to play music on Sunday in the afternoon with other people's music on the record, and he'd play with his horn, and then he'd record that.
Oh, wow, how cool.
And it's all in there, and nobody's ever heard it. They're going through all of his stuff very slowly. And there's a really great story about Louis Armstrong that's not well known. It's one of the reasons I decided to do the book. In 1954, him and his wife were coming back from a goodwill tour in Japan, and they were going by way of Hawaii. And as they entered into the United States, Camille, his wife, had inside a matchbox there was maybe 2 grams of marijuana, and she was you're there still, yes?
Absolutely. It just was
I thought I lost her.
No, not at all. Go ahead. I think I might know where you're going, but go ahead.
Yeah, so she got arrested, and it was his weed, not hers. And they went to a horrific, very public trial in Hawaii around Christmas time in 1953, 1954. They wound up in San Francisco on New Year's Day. On New Year's Day, Louis Armstrong sat down and composed this letter, which they just found. Is that what you were thinking I'm going for?
No, no, it was something else. But go ahead, finish your story.
Well, he wrote this letter right after it happened, and he wrote it to his manager, Mr. Glazier, who is this white hoodlum kind of guy who always took care of him, but probably ripped him off, but always took care of him, and they were together for 30 years. And he always was very obsequious to Mr. Glazier. Always did whatever Mr. Glazier told him to do because he felt that Mr. Glazier looked out for his best interests. And in this 10-page letter he fired off to Mr. Glazier, it goes on for about 6 pages and says how much I've always done everything you told me, Mr. Glazier. You know who I am. I'm your boy. This is exactly what he said.
Yeah.
And then he said, but I'm going to tell you something right now. And then he sent the next 3 pages explaining what in grand detail what humiliation his wife went through when she got busted for a couple of grams, and who on the staff that killed him, did not help her, and all this stuff. And then he said in the last page or 2, he got to it, and he said, I've never been more serious with you in my life. He goes, but here's the deal. You have your own ways of doing things. I don't care who you have to talk to or what you have to say, but you got to get me some kind of a special paper that's going to say this will never happen to me again, because if it does happen again, I'll put my horn down and I will never pick it up again. Wow. I am going to smoke weed every day for the rest of my life, and you got to make sure that I don't get arrested for it, or words to that effect.
Yeah. Wow. I bet you. Yeah.
And nobody knows what happened. They found the letter. No, there certainly wasn't an answer, but he never got busted again.
Yeah. Wow.
And also, he wrote a book called Gauge, and Glazier pulled out it was an autobiography, and about quite a lot of it was about marijuana, and Glazier destroyed most of it, and about 10 pages survived.
That's really amazing. I've been obviously growing up in a family where I had a jazz musician as a stepfather.
Yeah.
I was just exposed to a lot of stuff and stories and so forth. And, I happen to have my father on tape telling some of those stories, which are really, really cool. But so I knew about Mez and Satch, back in the day. So, growing for, the last bunch of years, I actually have named some strains that I crossed. One of them is Satchmo's Choice, and then I have one that's called the Mez. Because that's
Mighty Mez, man.
The Mighty Mez. And I also have the mightymez.com, and I'm going to do a site on Mesro. So it's,
you know what Mez is really, I mean, you can do a lot of, I went into this kind of deeply when I did the research for the book. You know what Mez's real accomplishment is in the thing is that, there's a lot of things he did, and I could go on, but his core accomplishment was he was among the first Vipers, the first group of marijuana smokers in Harlem, and he had the best connection, and he made sure they had the best weed.
Right. He was. My father told me that Mesro was the guy everybody got their weed from.
Yeah, and he was right in the very first core.
Yeah.
And in his book, he describes it in grand detail. Really, the blues. Really good book.
Yeah, I think he was born in like 1895 or something. Yeah, he's been.
Yeah. He's an older guy than Louis. Louis came in at 1900.
Yeah.
And he was a mediocre sax player. He was okay. He gets a lot of shit for it, but he was around the best players in the world.
Yeah, clarinet, I think.
Clarinet. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And also, he did a lot of different things. But that right there was his core accomplishment. And at that time, he was running buddies with Louis Armstrong. In his book, they talk about it. He was making good money with weed, and Louis was the king of New York. And they were dressed to the nines, and they were like the kings of Harlem.
Boy, what a time New York must have been then, right?
Yeah, man. And then Louis was at the top of his game. We're talking about, a genius who has just come off of Chicago, which he had to leave because he had too many gangsters on his ass. And he made it to New York, and he was literally at the top of his game and free of all the nonsense that had followed into Chicago. And so he blew two big plays. He was playing Uptown and Connie's Inn in Harlem every night, and he was playing in the Pit in the orchestra for Ain't Misbehavin' on Broadway. And he would get up and do the song "Ain't Misbehaving" for the intermission.
So you've been researching all this stuff to
Oh yeah. I've been at it for a long time, and I what I did was I went through all the books. I read them all. It was just a labor of love, and I isolated every reference about marijuana in all of the Louis Armstrong biographies. And then I double-checked back, and I did all kinds of things. For instance, here's a really good thing. I've never told anybody this. You're getting it on your show for the first time. One of the great iconic stories of Louis Armstrong is that when he was in Rome on a goodwill tour, the Pope had him and his wife come to Castel Gandolfo, which is the Pope's summer residence. And they went up there, and a very famous story. Everybody knows it. He said... the Pope asked him through a translator, "Do you and Mrs. Armstrong have any children?" And he said, words to this effect. He said, "No, Daddy, but we're still wailing." Or words to that effect. And everybody laughs, and it's a very funny Louis Armstrong story, but I read the drummer's autobiography about his musical life, an obscure thing, and then a little tiny note in the back. Like, a note on chapter 10. It says he was in the limousine going to Castle Gandolfo with Louis that night. And as soon as he got into the limousine, Louis pulled out a joint and said, "Let's fire a bomber up before we go see the Pope." So when Louis said that very famous line, he was high.
Is that where "Does the Pope Smoke Dope" came from?
No, that's David Peel.
Yeah, I know. I'm just kidding. The
God
late
bless
David Peel.
God bless David Peel.
You know, I'll tell you a story about a celebrity that you probably don't know. Okay.
Go.
Well, first of all, you know who W.C. Fields is because I know what generation.
I love W.C.
Okay. So I tell this story once a year on my radio show on August the 18th because W.C. Fields wrote a book called Fields for President in 1939, I think it came out, and it was during that election time. And part of it was like a satire on running for president, and also part biographical of him. Okay, right. So he starts off one of the chapters this way, and I'm paraphrasing. Every August 18th, I roll myself a marijuana cigarette, and I go in my backyard, and I smoke it, and I go into my memory basket, and I think about my life. Okay.
No, how did I miss that?
Well, you have to get that book.
Yeah, I guess so.
And since the 1970s, I always recognized August the 18th as my celebration of cannabis, when I smoked a joint and went into my memory basket and thought about my life. And sometimes I would show a W.C. Fields movie on the wall before there were VCRs, or have people over, and
right.
And this is pre those guys in San Rafael 420, but that's my story about W.C. Fields, and I can.
Wonderful. I know. It's funny. I was a big fan of his when I was younger, and I read a lot about him, but I never heard the marijuana reference. I would have remembered. He never spoke on stage until he was 29 years old, and he was on stage since he was like 12.
Right, incredible vaudevillian and juggler.
Yeah,
I mean,
juggler.
If you've seen him juggle cigar boxes back in the day,
yep.
It was just incredible. I'm a
He's
huge
the best
fan.
juggler in the world.
Yeah, nothing like it. So let's come forward about 90 years from where we were just talking about, and let's hear about what Whoopi and Maya are doing and what's going on with those products, because now that California is going adult use recreational in January, is that changing what you guys are doing? And tell us about your products as well, please.
Yeah, well, I mean, to answer your first question, everything's in a holding pattern. We want to wait until we see the final laws, the final rules. Everything is going to emerge. And everybody's going to the same lawyers and asking for the same advice, and everybody's in the same holding pattern right now, just making sure we position ourselves. It's a little less complicated for us. We're a medical cannabis company and plan to stay that way. We have 4 products at the moment with 11 different variations of those. No, I'm sorry, 12. 12 variations of those products. And basically that's a cacao. That when I say variations, we have a THC cacao, we have an extra strength THC cacao, and a wonderful CBD cacao. And
now, what do you mean by cacao? That's a soap.
Yeah, I know that was your next question. Everybody asked it. It's a raw chocolate, the kind you shouldn't give your dog.
This is an edible product.
Yes, it's absolutely delicious. There's no cannabis taste to it whatsoever. It's quite potent. It's quite effective for, we sell it for cramps, for menstrual discomfort. It's used for other things as well because it's a quite potent medicine in and of itself. It's a raw chocolate. It's delicious. A lot of people, you can take it any which way. You can put it on toast. People put it on toast. I love it in warm chocolate because I'm an old guy and I like my hot chocolate.
Yeah, me too.
And I put it in, and I'm also a marijuana gavone, so I make it nice and strong, and it's wonderful. It is. I'm not much, to be honest with you. I'm in the business, but I'm not much of an edibles guy my whole life. I was the guy from High Times, and I've done everything in the world, and I have my own preferences. But I really like the cacao that we produce. I really do.
So what are the other products?
And we have a bath soak. And a bath soak is a THC bath soak, and it goes in dermatologically over 100% of your body into your pores, and it's extraordinarily relaxing. We have a tincture that's out on the tincture market, and it's comparable to tinctures out there. And that's a real medicine for when you have good, you have a good need for, serious pain or some kind of really, a good kick. That's a tinctures for that. And we have a salve. And once again, before I got into the business, I wouldn't have thought of myself as a salve person necessarily. I'm a jaded guy from Jersey,
As I am as well. I'm from
yeah,
South,
you know what I'm
South
saying.
Jersey.
I nothing wrong with it, but it's just not my thing, and nor was it ever. And then I was exposed to the people who make the salve. I was exposed to Maya. I was exposed to the other people that work in our kitchen and that helped create the products themselves. And I began to understand it on that level. I still work in the company as the buyer, so I help buy the products. I know that we have very stringent requirements about quality and such. And so the salve blew me away. And what I mean by that is it's just phenomenal. It does so many different things. I got a bee sting between my toes. It got rid of it. It works. I have a 20-year-old daughter who suffers from very bad cramps. It works like a charm every time. And the reason it works like a charm is because not only do we put in the THC, that obviously is the magic for what we're doing here. The people that we have creating this were herbalists of their own accord, having nothing to do with THC. And the carrier oils, plural, that we use are high end, and we soak them with other herbs that are good for pain reduction, particularly menstrual cramps, like cramp bark, things like that.
Right.
And we soak it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I'm not sure of the term. I used to know, but so quite a bit of time. And so the oil, before we even see the THC, there it is, and it's a wonderful product that has a wide use, and I'm just blown away by the people's reaction to it. By far, it's what I'm told. What I'm asked for personally. And
I know what you mean, because
I'm just blown away by the entire idea of it.
Yeah, I used to manage a dispensary here in New Mexico, and so when we first started getting some salves in, you would give somebody a sample and they'd rub it on their shoulder, and then they'd come back an hour later and go, "Oh my God, my pain is gone." So I understand what you're talking about. So currently, Whoopi and Maya, that's the brand, right?
Whoopi and Maya Medical Cannabis. Okay. It's located throughout California. We'll be coming up with some other states very shortly. We'll be announcing as soon as we're ready. But that's the plan. And we just came out with the salve. I said is a highly effective and very popular. So we're about to come out with a roll-on. Right now we have it in a jar.
Perfect.
We're about to come out with a roll-on that you can carry for on the go. And Whoopi and I interviewed Whoopi from High Times. We got to know each other. She approached me with the idea of starting it. I said I would try and find some people. And, we did the Cannabis Cup for years. And I was a lucky guy. I knew a lot of really good people in the industry who were the real deal. And so when we all put it together, the company came together. Whoopi, of course, is she's the queen, man.
She's the face, and she talks about it openly for years. She's
one of the most impressive individuals I've ever met in my entire life. And I mean that's sincere. That was also true, like the day I met her.
So she's also known, to use vape pens. So is Whoopi going to have a vape pen?
Yeah, we started with the 4 things that we're doing here. And as far as the California market goes, we're just going to wait and see what happens with regulations.
Well, I have a great idea for combining 2 of your products, and you can have this idea. I want you to take the chocolate.
Okay, don't tell anybody. Just you and me in the radio audience.
And
Go
everybody
ahead.
else. Just take that chocolate and mix it into that bath soap thing. And a chocolate bath, I think, is in need for a lot of people.
Whoa, hey, yeah, that sounds kind of slinky and kinky. I like that.
So anyway, before I let you go, Rick, and I do want to have you back again and do some more history stuff with you. What's your Holy Grail favorite strain of all time, and your how do you like to smoke? What do you think of dabbing? It's
my Holy Grail strain of all time is Chemdog, and particularly from the guy who created Chemdog, who I knew. And no matter how high I was, I'd smoke that and I'd be higher.
Wow.
But on the other hand, when I recently, just before I left High Times, we did the Cannabis Cup in Jamaica, and I had the honor of they gave me a special law dispensation with the law with me and a couple of Rastas, and we went around the island and collected all the weed in the island. And they brought me to a little tiny place that was so far inside the island, I got ill from the car ride there. It was just so jumpy and lumpy and everything. And the reason they got me there was because it was undisturbed for 40 years and was the same marijuana from Jamaica I smoked when I was 18 years old.
Well, I remember that stuff myself.
Yeah, I mean, and believe me, I waited the next morning. I smoked it the very first thing by itself with that Jamaican coffee. And son of a bitch, it was exactly what I smoked when I was 18 years old.
My Holy Grail is the Gold Colombian from the early 70s. Okay,
Right, that's it. There was 4 kinds of weed in the old days, which was Mexican, Colombian, Jamaican, and something else, whether it was Sensimilia or Maui Wowie or something like that. But pretty much all the markets were Jamaican, Thai stick, some kind of exotic thing like that. But the major markets were Colombian, which was pretty much an indica, what they would call an indica. It made you tired. A Jamaican, which is pretty much a sativa. It made you laugh.
Mm-hmm.
And Mexican, which is brickweed.
What about the Panama? Same as the Jamaican, would you say?
Yeah, but again, by the time Panama came and went really fast.
Yeah, it wasn't around long. It was good, though.
Yeah, it's like Acapulco Gold. Mm-hmm. Acapulco Gold came and went. And what happened was there was a season where it was all the gold weed was from Acapulco, and it was Acapulco Gold. And after that, everything that had a gold leaf in it was Acapulco Gold.
Yeah.
And
meanwhile,
it had red in it. It was a Panama red.
Meanwhile, it was just yellow leaves going yellow while they were maturing.
Yeah. Well, I would be not doing my duty if I didn't. I'm a board member of NORML. I should shout out NORML. Please join NORML. That's the best way we're going to get to this. The thing I'd like to say to everybody, I've been doing this for a long time, is that nothing that we've ever accomplished has ever been accomplished except incrementally. All right, so everybody's got to understand that we're in this for the long haul, and if we get pushed back, Keith thought it was going to. Your question before, how long did you think back then? Keith said he thought it was going to be done in a couple of years. It got kicked back and went on for another 40 years. Yeah. So the arc of truth turns towards justice, but it does it very, very slowly.
Yeah, and it's on the backs of many people that have gone to prison.
Oh God, yes.
And,
I mean, there's just innumerable people, and I'd love to be able to write the book that actually goes through the history the last 30 years. I've thought about it. It's a daunting idea about how to include the players.
Yeah. We need to know, who they were. I mean, look, if it wasn't for people, in the AIDS community in California back in the 90s and 80s, using cannabis and bringing medical first. Okay, so medical in 1996 was the first thing, and of course they proved now the science was working, and other states started having it. But if it wasn't for what went on in California back then in the first medical state, we wouldn't have legalization today. So,
that's true. That's true. But also, if it wasn't for domestic marijuana that happened in the 80s,
oh yes, absolutely,
from a variety of places, medical wouldn't have had that there to point to and said that's our medicine we wanted.
Yeah. Do you know
what I mean? You needed each thing. I don't think anything was more important or less important than anything. It's all a step in the ladder.
Right. Well, where I was going with that though was, I just think that with legalization, we just all have to not interfere with medical and say, you know,
100%.
kind of save the medical programs, okay? Because
Yeah.
these are the people that have really shown now with all the science, you know, coming out of Israel for the last 60 years and now everywhere else, you know, now we have science to back up this stuff. But I just believe that medical needs to be separate from the recreational and adult use. So.
Yeah, you know, I feel funny about it because I got into this myself personally. Before I was a cannabis activist, I was an activist of various, like First Amendment activist and civil rights activism. I wrote a lot about that stuff. And I kind of wandered into this one here because I wanted to keep people out of jail. You know, that's the thing that got me into human rights violations. And then I got to understand the science and the politics of the plant became very appealing to me because it seemed very winnable. It seemed like, wow, this is a slam dunk right here, you know? And it was a lot of work, but it was true. We had God on our side with that one, you know? And so then medical, I got to be honest with you, when I first started off, I thought medical was a term of art, you know? Everybody's medicine. And then I started meeting some patients. And I realized that what I saw in their lives had nothing to do with what was happening in my life. You know?
I agree.
And it was if I could think about it for a moment, I had this dramatic moment in my hotel room when I first came to High Times. I went to a conference and this woman, I forget her name, she's very, very frail. And she was an activist. And I got a phone call. And I had interviewed her once on the phone, but I didn't really know her. And somebody said she had just arrived and she needed a hotel room to medicate. I said, sure, come on up. We were up there having a sesh, you know? And she walked in and she was so frail in a wheelchair and put her in the bed and she was shaking visibly. And her caretaker pulled out her medicine, hooked it up, you know, for her to smoke out of the pipe, lit the pipe, put her hands couldn't come anywhere near the pipe. And then they passed the pipe around. And then it came back down again. She took, this time her hands cupped the pipe. And they passed the pipe around. Mm-hmm. This time she grabbed the pipe. Mm-hmm. 2 bowls, 3 bowls, 6, 7 turns around the room. And she was holding the pipe and smoking it. I've never seen anything so dramatic in my life. And it changed my entire way I look at medical marijuana.
Yeah, you know, every day I feel that as well. I totally get that. I've seen some incredible videos, you know, of children having a seizure and they take a roll-on. You said you're going to make a roll-on. They take a roll-on and they put it on the bottom of the kid's foot, and all of a sudden, like in seconds, the seizure stops.
Yeah, and, yeah, that's you know, I mean, that's the other thing too, is like, you know, it's so dramatic. It's so dramatic. Here, I live in New Jersey. Chris Christie is like, you know, the Antichrist here.
I call him Governor Cheesesteak.
Well, there was a kid here. He's no longer a kid, but when he was 14 years old, he got cancer. He was a neighbor's kid. And we had passed a medical law here. And the only dispensary, was 2 dispensaries in the entire state. One was in my town. But he couldn't open it because they were making him jump through hoops, all the regulatory crap, right? And Christie had just gotten in. I was the guy who asked them publicly if they were going to let this happen. They lied to me and said, yeah, I don't want to take medicine away from sick people. Mm-hmm. And then this kid got diagnosed with cancer, went to his first round of chemo without knowing me, met me. We started giving him I started giving him weed. What you would call medical out there, I just basically shared my weed with him. While we're going through trying to open this medical, I'm not me, but while they were trying to open the dispensary downtown, they put them through so much that this kid went through his chemotherapy, went into remission, and came back out around and was cured from cancer before they ever opened the door.
Well, that's what you know, that's what our community has really been about over the years, especially, you know, over the last few years. Just, you know, refugees, people, you know, moving from one state to another to get treatment and so forth. And people like Governor Cheesesteak there, you know, when they bring up the fact that it's great for women and you know, their periods, he turns it down. And had
Oh
some.
God! I mean, to him, this is not even he's not even listening to this as a real issue. To him, this is a political football that should I kick it or should I punch it or whatever it is, you know. And unfortunately, we might be talking about our next drug czar.
Nah,
because
that's not going to happen.
well, he won't pass the Senate, but I can't imagine who they're going to.
But doesn't he already have a job? Isn't he like the head of the opioid crisis?
Yeah, but that sounds like a nice transitionary job. I've always thought that was a transitionary job for him to reinvent himself as a drug czar.
I know. Personally, I think he's finished politically, and
I sure hope so.
Can't wait to get him out of there. Anyway, Rick Cusick, you know, thank you for having this great conversation with me. Again, Rick is the co-founder and COO at Whoopi and Maya, with those great products available in California for medical use right now. Also involved with NORML, former associate publisher of High Times. And gosh, you even went to Clifford J. Scott High School. Look at that.
And by the end of the year, there's going to be a book out called The Art of the Lie, and it's going to be about Donald Trump.
Well, you know what? I think that's a million seller for sure.
Sometimes you can't say no to a story.
Well, I'll take a copy for sure. Anyway, Rick, thanks so much, and we'll be right back after this.
Folks think that I'm crazy, say I'm foolish as can be. They're just jealous, 'cause I've been out in the backyard smoking tea. Say I can play the piano, and I'm pretty good on the stage. It ain't no lie, I'll tell you why I've been outside blowing gauge. Gin and Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola and gin. Take it here with a Mickey fin. A big fat stick of tea'll make me grin. You take the whiskey and you give me the gin. The folks say that I'm lonesome, say I'm blue as I can be. Well, if you're smoking that jive when I pass by, gate save the roads for me. I'm lonesome, say I'm blue as I can be. Well, if you're smoking that jive when I pass by, gate save the roads. Ain't talking about camels, save the roads. I ain't talking about luggage, save the roads for me. The medical marijuana, the medical marijuana, radio show.
Wow, what a great bunch of stories to hear somebody that's been around our industry for so long and learn about some of the history of people in cannabis over the years. Anyway, thank you, Rick Cusick, for that. We'll await your book on Trump, of course. The liar and the lying lies that a liar always tells. Anyway, I also want to thank my two radio mentors, both with the initials HS. Thank you for your inspiration. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, if you have a book coming out in our industry or not, info@mmjradio.com. If you are a activist, you have a product, info@mmjradio.com. We'd love to interview you. If you'd like to hear some of our old shows, it's medicalmarijuanaradio.com as well as mmjradio.com. My YouTube channel is LSLove88. On SoundCloud and Spreaker, we're MMJ Radio. We're on CannabisTube.net. Also on Spreaker and iHeartRadio, we're on the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. And we have a channel on Now TV, which is channel 937.
Shalom. Shalom.
yeah, no. Fuck Trump.
Papu Puyeta, Suyeta, Papu Didi, Sapapu Papu Papu Pupu.